Hello, everybody. This is Project Alpha. You're watching it live with Aleksey Arestovich. He's joining our studio online. Good evening. Good evening, Alexey. I suggest we start with the map of the actions on the front that people are most interested in, particularly Pokrovsk, because related to Kursk operation, we have not looked down here at this area much. So what is your estimation how threatening this situation is for Pokrovsk? Well, okay, there is such a term called brigade area of defense. This area can be up to 25 to 30 kilometers deep, and brigade portion of the front on the width. So we only have about 13 kilometers left till Pokrovsk. Information is intermittently changing, but even if we consider 13 to be the real number, it means that Pokrovsk is already in the brigade area of defense of those brigades that are defending the front. The problem of those brigades here that they have not fully staffed as many of the territorial defense, and there are several of them defending Pokrovsk area, but in any case, Pokrovsk is now in the depth of their defense, so this is dangerous. This is in their zone of responsibility, and it's getting really close to the front. So essentially, the fight goes already in and around that area. Enemy's field artillery can already reach Pokrovsk. Some of the listeners are writing, the Ukrainian Armed Forces is texting us saying that everything is very sad on Pokrovsk direction and nobody gives a damn because we all are concentrated on the Kursk district operation, and the victory is fantastic, but one needs to make sure that you don't forget about the other parts of the front, because otherwise it will be very painful. So how painful do you think it will be, Alexei? Well, Nikolai, it will be very uncomfortable, sure. One cannot say that the front will collapse. The front will not waver as well, and there are even other roads not going through Pokrovsk, so it is not critical. It's not a happy situation if we lose it, but it definitely is not a critical item of defense. Plus, it probably will add some symbolism for Russians to add another township captured to their fold. But again, going back to strategic or serious issues there, anything critical? No, nothing like that will happen. The other questions that we should be asking here is, what is systemically being done about it? We have an operational breakthrough, for example, and we should not be connecting Kursk and Pokrovsk because they're very different. They're not disconnected, it's different operations. And on Russian side, they removed some of the troops from Chasiv Yar to try to address Kursk district, but the others are still there, they're still fighting, so they're not connected, and we should be reviewing these two operations as two separate events. So here's a question. When on Toretsk and Pokrovsk direction, when things are not going well, and I'm putting it very diplomatically, and Kursk, yeah, we're doing great, we're blowing up bridges, we're not exactly aware of the full ideation, but Kursk operation did teach us to be smart and careful because we are not exactly sure what's happening. So here we may be luring them in, but we'll see, I guess, by the results. If they occupy Pokrovsk and nothing follows from our side, then one can ask a question that a certain threshold has been broken, and one can start asking questions, what was that Pokrovsk operation about? And if perhaps we're preparing some trap, if we're luring them in this direction and we have a plan how to then encircle and destroy them or do something about that, then we can say that there is some ideation and there is a plan what to do about it. We don't know yet. Right now we see and observe the situation very close to operative breakthrough of Russian army and the Pokrovsk district. And Toretsk as well, they have operative successes which are rather significant there. And that's all we can state. If you go over the posts of our servicemen who are commenting and criticizing government to such a degree of critique and heat that that damned Arestovich has yet to learn a lot of words and things. But ultimately they bring up the same topic that we've been discussing in our streams for about a year, since early autumn last year. And I don't want to bring these items again, but the main question is, what are we doing to learn? What are we doing to address Russian threats? So, Alexey, how do you gauge the logic of these events? It's curious for me that you said that perhaps we have an idea to lure them into pretend breakthrough and then perhaps cut them at the root. And with this, simultaneously, we also understand that we do have some reserves, looking at Kursk operation, that are being preserved for some more important targets. Right? Don't know how correct it is to say one target is more important than the other, but definitely for more media lucrative or bright targets than just carrying out defensive operation in Pokrovsk. And that's why perhaps there is an interest to hold the current front line with the minimal of resources, perhaps even throwing some of the disconnected and not exactly frontline detachments to do that work. And as soldiers are writing when they're getting just a couple clips and a command to hold the area. So it seems that on one hand we have resources to carry out operations in Kursk district, but on the other area we are stifling our own resources. What is the logic here? Nikolai, the logic here is very simple. In war, you always often have to choose between bad and very bad. But in this instance, there was a choice between good and bad. Why? Because our achievements in Kursk district, they greatly outweigh the advantages if we could have stopped Russian troops in Pokrovsk direction. And in war, you have to sacrifice some people for success of the others. This is a horrific choice. That's why the profession of an officer is not exactly what people understand it to be when they're looking from outside, especially when we're talking about the generals and higher level commanding officers. Because soldiers have black boots, they carry out dirty jobs in the trenches, but generals have to make strategic decisions and pick what they sacrifice for what. And from the military standpoint, it is a correct decision to enhance Kursk operation. And then instead of that, they could have been sent to Pokrovsk district to stop Russian advance and perhaps slow it down. And then eventually they'll either stall the front or continue slow pressure. That would have been much less remarkable achievement on all levels. And right now we have a situation when we are continuing to push our incursion into Russian territory proper, and we can see that Russia has to react. They are already withdrawing troops from Chasiv Yar district, and perhaps they will touch and uncork some other troops to throw to Kursk. I think that we probably do not have enough, and it's my opinion, but probably don't have enough resources to cut their incursion near Pokrovsk and to encircle them there. I don't think we have resources, but we are acquiring bonuses in Kursk district, and this is basically an exchange. And I understand how horribly it may sound for those soldiers who are fighting in Pokrovsk district and for those citizens of Pokrovsk who are seeing that looming over them. But I am sorry, I have to say that it is a beaten up, banal phrase, but I don't have anything else in this. This is the horrible truth of war, but that's what it is. This is the cruel truth of war. That's why Kursk is a higher priority than Pokrovsk in the current situation of military political situation on the front and around Ukraine. All right, we also see, Alexei, that operation in Kursk district made a big impression on citizens of Russia. 45% of them are saying that the mood in society is concerning. Last week, it was only 33%, and it seems like they just are going on a swing. A couple of weeks ago, they had a positive high of this year. Everything was pacifying them, creating unworrisome situation, and then all of a sudden, this Pokrovsk situation that appeared on the media, and it jumped additional 12% of concern onto the weights. Well, Nikolai, we don't have a specific task to bother Russian citizens, but this is a secondary indicator of what actually is happening. And the problem is that despite of our actions here, of our work here, the war is very often considered to be by masses, by public and mass, as a kinetic action. Which FPV hit which tank hit which trench. And even abstracting from Arestovych and Feldman on this stream, if you look at the documents of United States, Russia, China, that war is a multi-level process, and the highest military level of operations is cognitive war, not even PSYOP, but cognitive warfare. So it is in the area of cognitive warfare where we hit them, and we continue to develop our success. Slower than one would want to, but of course on the 12th day it's more difficult to continue the advancement with the same tempo as on the first. But the operation is still going, and we need to understand that cognitive form of warfare, the highest level of warfare, is where we're hitting them. And 12% shift in the polling, this is the indicator of what's happening. Plus, on the other levels, of course, kinetic warfare is also happening. One should not forget that modern war is not so much about defeating the enemy's army on the front, as it is about convincing logistics, support, and populace to stop this war, to cease fighting. And this is where we made a significant step. And just for that step, this operation was needed. If we're talking about negotiation positions, it definitely fortified them significantly. So if we're talking about the country and convincing it to not fight, we can also talk about the provocations of cruelty that Russians are often throwing in the media. So, having faced huge losses of prisoners in the format of prisoners of war, when Ukrainians basically captured from 1,500 to 2,000, there are different numbers, during the Kursk incursion, they have started another shot of cruelty, an injection of cruelty into their society and their media. And that was an incident related to 155th Brigade of Russian Federation. Immediately on the Ukrainian side, there were appeals to not take prisoners, to avenge the action of cruelty that Russians supposedly done over a Ukrainian troop. So, why do you think on the third year of war there is no centralized signal of how to act, or rather not react, when the opponent suggests a certain cruelty escalation? Well, Nikolai, we're not exactly sure, right? Perhaps there was an internal signal in the military, but I think it appears to me that this was more of a social media incident that didn't even spike too much attention. I'm actually in direct connection with the guys who are fighting in Kursk district. We have a lot of acquaintances of ours, Nikolai, whom we helped before. Nobody is telling any fairy tales about 155th Brigade. They're telling me about different things, but nobody mentions the head that was supposedly cut and 155th Brigade on the Russian side. So this seems to be a micro PSYOP in the framework of certain events. And I suspect that even the head on the spike could have been not real. Could be a real one, but nobody can guarantee that it was a head of a Ukrainian soldier and not just of their own dead casualty of war. So one can say in this regard that looking at what's happening there, that in the social media, supposedly Ukrainian troops are retaliating 155th Brigade and almost destroyed it. It's not a big deal. 155th Brigade was already destroyed twice. They had to rebuild it from scratch. Even if we imagine that this is not a PSYOP, if this is a real thing, that they really cut somebody's head off and our troops angered and destroyed 155th, the signal should be simple, I think. While the enemy is resisting, we're destroying them with any means and measures we have. These are the rules of war. No crying, no snot. Detect them, encircle them, destroy them. The moment they rise their hands up, the moment they refuse to fight and are eager to surrender, is when you stop fighting them. When you imprison them as prisoners of war, they get official status, and you treat them better than you treat your troops. Any prisoners of war, any of them, is under Geneva Convention protection, the UN bylaws protection, and anybody who violates that will be suffering consequences. So same thing about civilians in the war zone. So when we're talking about the additional cruelty in that instance, one, I think, needs to be more careful, because nobody of those who are fighting there are commenting on it. This is probably Telegram channel's story. They wrote a scary post with the head, or maybe a head, and then we wrote another scary post in the back. But nobody from the actual front is talking about that. Even if we imagine this is true, we have another fact, for example. I know for a fact that there are some ultra-right nationalists, which are that scarecrow for Russians, for Putin himself. I know de facto that there are people, due to different reasons, have been very emotional about Bucha and other areas of Russian atrocities. There's no cruelty recorded against civilians. Russians could have found some videos where Ukrainian troops are taking food from their local supermarket or have destroyed a civilian vehicle. We don't know details, of course. One would need to investigate it deeper, but let's imagine it's true. They've shot up the civilian vehicle, let's imagine the worst, and they've taken some foods from the local supermarket. So when you're waging a maneuver warfare, you're going on the individual rations. By the third, the fourth day, you're out of it. You're a big guy, 200 pounds plus, running with a lot of gear, and you see the store that is being marauded by local citizens already. What, you're going to be sentimental? You need to eat because you need to continue fighting. So that's why they go take water and take food. Of course, not the best action, but this is not a systemic policy. There is no command, just go and loot everything you find. Again, civilian vehicle. Imagine again the warfare in the township. Bullets flying, grenades exploding. You see a vehicle moving, perhaps you see somebody in a camo in there, or it seems like somebody is a military in there, and you shoot it up, you pull the trigger. I can tell even more. Among 1.3 million of servicemen in Ukraine, you can probably find psychos and mentally unstable people, but there is a nuance. We're not conducting that cruelty as systemic policies. It could be excess of the executioner and the executor on the field. An operator might have made a wrong decision, right? There could be mistakes done individually. But on the policy level, that is not what's happening. Nobody is affirming these actions. Nobody says, yes, continue shooting up the civilian vehicles. Not even on the level of usual civilian discussion in society. And nobody is giving them special awards to those detachments that were terrorizing, for example, any locals, like Russian 65th Brigade got for Bucha from Putin. So that's the difference. There is a thing called subjective presentation. And the main factor there is the presence of intent. When you knew about this intent and you systemically carried it out. And unlike that situation, when our troops are facing mobile warfare, high maneuver warfare, it is difficult. Because when you cross the road, when you run across the road, that's the first thing that is being taught to soldiers. Never run across the road during the warfight. Because that's the reflex. You get shot even by your own if they mistake you for somebody else. As for taking food rations, food from the supermarkets, water, this is not like a policy of terror that Russian troops are executing on every square meter of occupied territory. These are not torture chambers. And our society, neither them nor the political leadership are approving of any of these deviations. And this is very good because right now Ukrainian army is passing that exam. They have entered Russian territory. And how did Russian propaganda react when Russian troops were actually documented killing civilians? They gritting their teeth, but they were saying, well, this is our duty still to cleanse the land, and I'm sorry, these are casualties, they will have to happen. We are, second, we did not start this war, but we're not avenging it. We're not avenging everybody left and exerting revenge on everybody, on civilians. Of course, there are always jokes about learning Ukrainian anthem, learning Ukrainian language, but this is more on the level of jokes. right? The only thing that exacerbates that is that the person joking has a machine gun on the shoulder and there's a civilian in front of him. But one can still hear it in the way it is said and everything, that there is no intent to harass the civilian. Unlike if we take situation in reverse, when Ukrainian citizens were killed for documents, for being a relative of a serviceman, for speaking Ukrainian, for Ukrainian tattoo on your body. Remember, when they started the war, they actually had lists for each and individual township whom to execute, if they have been in military or if they have relatives serving in the Ukrainian armed forces. So Russian propagandists are at a lack of resource to portray that Ukrainians are cruel, that are really doing something horrible, because we don't. But at the same time, what they are showing is marauders from Akhmat, from Chechnya. They're actually showing videos and saying these guys are looting, pillaging, and raping. So, interesting situation. Okay, Alexey, let's also play in this regard the actions of our military, of our troops on the occupied territories. In your view, the story with relocating Kursk residents who want to move from that district to Ukraine, the data that surfaced that we perhaps would be moving them to some area in Sumy district, do you think it's the right action? Look, according to Geneva Convention, we are carrying out all responsibility for what's happening in the occupied territory, from zoonotic epidemics to food and water and medical issues of population. Geneva Convention allows to hurt local population in their rights, even allows to use them as workforce. But it also binds the occupants to provide whatever is necessary for human life. Not at the expense of their own troops, but, if evacuation needs to happen, that's part of it. The problem here is to formally record the agreement and perhaps pay more attention to that, because after war there may be some lawsuits. Somebody may move and then after the war start a lawsuit against our country, saying that this was done by force. So I would probably even fixate that on video as much as possible, that I indeed confirm that I'm doing it my own volition. And of course, as much as we can to involve international organizations, humanitarian orgs, to follow through, to help these people, and to also help us provide the proper relations with media. This is a standard process. There are no genius inventions around it. This is just work that needs to be done. It's a protocol work. I hope we'll have enough brains and understanding how to do that, but the fact that we established military administration rather quickly, it shows that we do have specialists in military law who know what they're doing, because we have to do exactly that. A single intake, single administration point that is in charge of providing for civilians in the occupied area, and also preventing illegal actions of our troops if these occur. So let me clarify here. Would you move these people to Ukraine as a compact group, or do you want to disperse them throughout? It doesn't matter that much, Nikolai. It's probably not right to expect that they all will be scary diversion troops, right? You understand that our special services will be keeping an eye on them, and probably when they live together as a compact settlement, it's easier to monitor them than putting them individually throughout the country, and then you have to spend more resources to chase that. So the government needs to make a decision, look at the overall resources, perhaps consult with our ombudsman, Dmitry Lubinets, with international organizations, including representatives of Russian Federation, by the way, and yeah, that's discussed, that's official element. Perhaps Russia would want to help their citizens in some of the evacuations. This is all discussed in the international conventions. And this is the legalities of the war process. And by the way, through Bubinets, we have conducted prisoners exchange many times when people were saying there'll be no exchange. He's very professional. I have worked with him for a brief period, but I did, and he produced a very favorable impression on me. He was working in very difficult conditions when Normandy format was in a complete stalemate, and there was no direct direction of where we're going, but he still managed to achieve certain milestones and exchange people and help them. So this is work that needs to be carried out, and you have to communicate with your enemy. This is written out in the international law. And of course, I would also bring as much as I can international partners and international organizations, so there would not be complaints about us setting up concentration camps or anything like that. All right, I also have to catch on another phrase you said about ultra-right nationalists that are supposedly on the Kursk incursion operation as a part of Ukrainian armed forces. Alexander Lukashenko, who is effectively conducting the management functions in Belarus, right, he's carrying out de facto control. He's not a president. Exactly so. We do not consider him legitimate. But he said that on the territory of Ukraine, there are no Nazis. Ukraine is completely denazified. So where are those ultra-right nationalists, Alexei? Well, you know, frankly, I know a couple of those whom Russians were painting as scarecrows. Those were one of those who communicated with grannies there, right? The criteria, how scary are they, is practical implementation. So those ultra-rights are on the incursion into Russia proper, in Kursk district. They're clear-cut occupants on the Russian territory. And what? Granny, sorry, we cannot give you a lift, says that scary nationalist. They're apologizing, sorry, we have equipment in the truck. We cannot carry you. How can we help you otherwise? Right, you get it. So this is all about the practice. Bandera, who was in German prison, he was writing stories about no mercy to anyone. Shukhevich, who was fighting in the field, he had an entirely different approach. The will of people, the will of individuals. The moment the Ukrainian rebellious army was created, half a year later, they became to such degree internationalists that they understood right there that they cannot win on the narrow agenda. And we have one of the Western brigades. My friend, he's from the Central Command, and he was working with that brigade right there on the front, on the command outpost. And they were planning military actions near the or around the Russian group Leningrad that is doing northeast of the front. He noticed that 95% of that brigade from the west of Ukraine are discussing their plans in Russian. That is not a problem for them. Language was never a problem. There are a lot of Russian nationalists serving among them since 2014. But the further the person is removed from the front line, the more they worry about internally about being somebody who dodges the fight, dodges the responsibility, the louder they scream, and the media and the social. So our most hardcore patriots are usually living all to the west of Montreal in Canada. And very often it's not to throw a stone at the females here, but the emotional nature of them very often drives them to very peculiar statements. When our troops entered Kursk district, did we know how we will behave? No, we did not. I did not how we will behave. But here we are. We entered. A ton of very Western troops there. A ton of what Russians consider nationalists. And nothing. Grandma, how we can help you, right? And a lot of prisoners. Right, indeed, a ton of prisoners. And we're not sentimental. As long as they're holding arms and shooting at us or aiming at us, we'll be killing them by any means necessary. But the moment they surrender, they're under protection. No cruelty and protection. Everything is honest. This is how the troops of European army wage wars. And I was complaining a bit. I was concerned about us going too close to the brink of falling down the Russian mode of behavior. I was gladly relieved with how we are conducting Kursk operation. That concern actually did not conspire, so it did not come to life. And people are still trying to push some ideological or political agenda around it, but the practice on the front, the practice with the troops shows different. All right, let's, before we discuss more things, I'll ask this question. And I will ask it because there are different estimations about operation in Kursk in social media and the ideological area. And they were critical to a degree. Some people said that, why did we even go to Kursk district? Do we not care about troops while we expanding them? The others were screaming that, oh, we've broken the negotiation process, there'll be no negotiations now. In your view, our real position at the negotiation table as the country, has it become significantly better or not much? It has improved somewhat, but only because the operation is not over yet. That's somewhat. But we definitely have certain wins. This is a victory in the cognitive warfare. You can see on the reaction of their officials, on the reaction of their media sphere, very uncomfortable answers and response to that in Russia, up to calls to go and remove Putin. In Russia, you can go to jail for 7 to 12 years for such an appeal, or perhaps you will be found dead in some of the forested area with traces of Novichok. What's important is that the formula about freezing the front line is problematized, because it was favorable as long as the front line was occurring only on the territory of Ukraine. That's why freezing the front line was beneficial for Russia anyway. And right now we do have about 1,000 square kilometers that problematize that thesis, or that needs to be discussed. For example, let's exchange the area for an area, or 1,200 kilometers for 1,200 kilometers, or perhaps one would outline that this is a false principle and we need to use some other guiding one for negotiations. And Kursk operation is not over yet. There could be other options. We could withdraw tomorrow and not hold a square yard of Russian territory. Or the other one, if we push further, dug deeper and captured even more important areas and got a stronger negotiation position. I will say once again, in the West, people were shocked, those who are in charge of peace negotiations, and they were discussions up to, and I'm saying it delicately here, let's call Ukraine to order among some of the hotshots for this operation, because they were concerned that we're breaking their negotiation trend. And first of all, this is not the only opinion. We have Western media that is very positively reflecting on our successes in Kursk district. So some people who are conducting negotiations policy, even if they're representing the current administration, it's understandable that they were building a house of cards and then somebody turned on the fan and it crumbled. And they cannot not consider public opinion and representatives of other political forces that are saying, great, Ukraine is doing fantastic, they should do it again. So there is a difference of opinions on that. President Zelensky made a few statements before our stream, and he is conducting he's building a very strong logic here. He is saying that our problem is that Russia is hitting us without being punished in return. If you allowed us to use long-range arms, which we already have, we could have been using them, and Kursk incursion would not have been needed. Remember, when it all started, I did mention that this operation is about getting permission to use long-range weapons on Russian territory. And yeah, here you can see that in his logic. And the second logic is prisoners of war. We need to return some of ours, so we need to have stock to exchange. And only the advancing party can capture, usually, those prisoners. If you're defending, it's much more difficult for you to capture some. So the logic is pretty ironclad here. And Zelensky also said that the slowdown of military support to Ukraine became the reason for the Kursk operation. He is hinting at, please do not slow down military support because of this operation, because we have more reserves, more resources to conduct another one. And we need your help. And I have heard different opinions in the United States. As I like to say, New York taxi drivers are saying that Ukraine needs to be sanctioned for such a misaligned operation that was not communicated to partners. But it's a very complex matter. even after the news that Germany may dwindle their support because of the Nord Stream discoveries, a few days later, Germany came out and said that no, we will continue supporting. EU saying yes, we will continue supporting. Germany is at a difficult fork in the road because their public opinion wants to investigate that deeper because it did hit their pockets, and they're about to create a commission in Bundestag. But right now, this is not an official position. There are no made decision in this regard. Yes, there are people who are upset with Germany and their position, and there are people who are upset with Washington. But these people have not won, and they're not driving the opinion. They're not binding others to their will. So there are no finalized decisions. Kursk operation is also ongoing. It is not done yet. So this is a live process. One thing people need to understand is that negotiation framework has not disappeared anywhere. And Lavrov's and Putin's statements that they are not going to negotiate, this is just pumping the situation and the strategic framework of it. Negotiation frame is still there. President Zelensky confirmed again there will be a second summit in November. So general frame is still in existence. And I did warn our viewers that before the second round of this Congress, the fight on the front will escalate, and we probably will see even more action. And otherwise, Russia is just responding on the principle, please hold me somebody, otherwise I'll go and retaliate. So it's just a visage, and this is the bright entrance into negotiation format. That's how I think about it. Okay, Maryana Bezuglaya. She was criticizing until Kursk operation. She was criticizing Commander-in-Chief Syrsky. She made a publication now called Rehabilitation or a Cunning Plan of Ukrainian Zhukov. And looking just at the title of this text, one can understand that she is rather critical towards Syrsky and his methods of action. And at the same time, Syrsky indeed scored a bit, right, in this operation. One cannot denounce these achievements. One cannot just close your eyes on the breakthrough that he conducted, the way he organized it. His actions are effective on the battlefront. So what do you think? Do you think Maryana's rhetoric is over the brim in this regard? It's too critical? Nikolai, we cannot forbid our congresswoman to use the words how she wants to. We can address some of the technicalities here. Syrsky is definitely not a Zhukov school follower. Zhukov school tells to concentrate resources and to break through with mass, not with wits. Just concentrate and break through with your forehead. There was another different school, a school of Frunze, more cunning, more in a Cossack style with a maneuver and improvisation. The borderline expressions of both lines of thought. One of them was Kievan Military School, Military Academy, named after Frunze, and Moscow School, that was more straightforward. In a paradoxical way, Syrsky is Russian by nationality, and he finished the Moscow establishment. But he is acting in the best traditions of Kievan school, at least in the offensive. Operation is brilliantly organized and brilliantly being realized, the initial phase at least. But I think there will not be an utter catastrophe, how some people are saying. I think everything will go generally okay with it. There are more questions to Syrsky, and we continue to ask them. These are questions about defense, about his defense operations. Second part is about training our troops. Somebody needs to do something about it, because training is not just bad, it's just lying there on the floor and nobody is picking it up. And he was commanding 3/4 of our armed forces, even under Zaluzhny. So he's still in charge. Paratroopers and storm brigades, they have a pretty good level of training, but our ground forces are limping in this regard. And here, I'm pleased to say that paratroopers are being commanded by Igor Skibuk, a general, and he studied together with me. I was in the first group, and he was in the third or fourth. We're from the same company, same year. So here the nuance is that these questions need to be presented with answers. There have to be some systemic actions happening around them. We are objective here. We are praising him when he is good. I'm the first one to praise him. When he is being blamed of being Zhukov, he is not Zhukov. He is more of a Cossack style, or at least closer to Kievan style. He's improvising, he's attacking. He has his weaknesses in defense and in training and in systemic actions or changing military system or of organization altogether. I even understand a lot of his decisions. For example, I would say not Zhukov's, but Stalin's method, I would say, if comparing him. The fact that he is rotating commanders very quickly. So in a couple months, a brigade commander can be removed. This is Stalin style, not in regards of repressing people, but Stalin was going through people in the same fashion. He, for example, would call a director of the evacuated factory that was moved to the east of Russia, somewhere in the steppes near Ural mountains, and there are kids and women servicing this factory. And this could be a military factory producing, let's say, tanks. So in the ideal circumstance, this factory was producing 100 a month, and Stalin gives you an order to produce 146. When the director says it's impossible, he's given a statement that this is exactly why I'm sending you there, because you need to find a way to do it. If he failed, his destiny was glum, but very gloomy and very short. But if he succeeded, and they were the ones who succeeded, who managed to solve unsolvable tasks, they were elevated in the Soviet system, solving more complex tasks. And I understand, I'm not supporting him for his quick decisions in this regard, but I understand why is he doing that. Perhaps this is a way to choose the right cadre. He's 60 years old and has been fighting in this war for a while, and perhaps he hasn't found a better way to filter the better commanders. It would be nice to make an interview with him if somebody did that. By the way, speaking of, would you like, dear Commander-in-Chief, to give me an interview? I'll try to be as objective as possible. We can talk about Maryana and about trouble with the lower level commanding officers and overall the bouquet of issues that are following you in the media. I will try to be honest. I will not be attacking you where it is not deserved, it's not warranted, but I will try to follow the facts and we can talk. Maybe for the first time you'll be giving an interview to somebody who understands your profession, right, and who actually served under your command. I was finishing my service in 2019 in the main command of ground forces, and he was commander-in-chief already. And that's where we got introduced personally. So I perhaps am not supportive of some of his decisions, but at least I understand their logic. And that's why the main systemic question is about battle readiness, battle training. You can explain a lot of things, but still, there are questions, there are things that need to be addressed. And again, cadre policies, internal relations between different layers of military org. A question what to do with commanders who are more prone to conducting meat attacks or meat types of defense, wasting soldiers. Question about holding the lines that are not conducive to defense, but just lines on the map. So there are a lot of questions. But one should give him his due. He's brilliantly conducting offensive operations. And we can conduct a very honest discussion, put the black stones on the left side, put the white stones on the right, and compare. All right, one cannot not mention the publication in The Economist, Alexey, this week that made a lot of noise. There are several statements in it. I'll start with this. The Weekly Mirror highlighted that Syrsky hid the plans of offensive in Kursk district from Yermak and Western allies, says Economist. They note that preliminary operations of Syrsky were disrupted. That's why he made his bet on secrecy with this operation, and he was sharing his information only with a small group of generals, and he talked with President Zelensky only in person. In our last stream, you said that we can perhaps say that Yermak is not really a spy anymore after this operation, right? Well, I did not denounce the myth about that, but I said that we can look at the situation and say that, make our own conclusions. Of course he knew. Addressing the fact the situation was not leaked, that operation was not leaked, perhaps he's a cunning spy who knows when to leak and when not to leak. But anyway, we do have a fact that it was not leaked, and it should be put in on record, and we should continue looking at him if the society wants to. So your sources tell me that Yermak was aware of that operation. All right, Nikolai, do you think when I left the country, I got fewer sources or more sources? I don't know, Alexey. I can say I got more, Nikolai. Okay, well, trust you on this. So with this, Syrsky in July and the verge of Kursk operation was apparently on the eve of being fired, according to The Economist. We can connect some facts. Maryana Bezuglaya was criticizing him heavily. The trend of his firing potentially was being discussed in the media, and there were discussions of who can take his place. Budanov was among one of the possible appointees brought up in the media. So the process was going in that direction, and apparently it didn't happen. And The Economist today accuses Yermak and Bezuglaya, and perhaps they want to tie her with Yermak in this trend, that Yermak could have fired or torpedoed Syrsky as Zaluzhny before that via Bezuglaya and her attacks. So they presented as Yermak was not made aware. He was attacking Syrsky. Maryana was preparing public opinion to get him fired. And in the meantime, he somehow managed to make this operation true, and even though he is not politically strong, he made himself unfireable. What would you say about this construct? Nikolai, this is a detective story which somebody told to The Economist, like a Hollywood series, right? He almost got fired, but at the last second he planned a secret operation in secrecy from the second person in command. Of course, President has not said a word to Yermak and just talked with Syrsky only 3 times. Do you believe these fairy tales? I was there. I actually stayed in the room together with President and Yermak, the 3 of us. I know who makes decisions and how, especially on the decisions of changing the commander-in-chief. I know who and how are making decisions. And when people are saying that Yermak was not aware, I don't know what to do, to cry or to laugh. And that suspense, almost fired, and then he is so successful in conducting this operation. This is all Brazilian soap operas. Of course they knew everything. They were planning things together from the beginning of operation. When it is just initiated as an idea, it is being reviewed on the level of Zelensky and his second in command. Syrsky has a different feature, by the way, commendable feature. He is not allowing politics to enter his domain. He is keeping politics outside of military. And it has 2 sides. On one hand, he is absolutely adhering to the orders of Supreme Commander, but he is not letting politics into the military. He is not making a mistake of Norman Schwarzkopf, who was a 4-star American general who'd won in liberating Kuwait from Saddam, became national hero, and then made one political statement and got dispersed in nothingness, being ostracized. Because military, in a good scenario, should be mum about politics. Politicians should be the ones running the politics. General usually serves for 30-35 years. Through that time span, he goes through 6 or 7 supreme commanders in chief. And he continues to serve his homeland, right? You start as a lieutenant, you finish as a general, like Syrsky. And there is some strength in this position. He really does not let politics in the military. And this is good. But the story that was told to The Economist, this is I think it's a cover legend to what's happening in reality. Usually The Economist is pretty good about checking facts, but I think in this case they either failed to check or decided to support this cover operation. Perhaps they're participating in it with their conscious decision. So what could that cover operation be about, Alexei? About the real system, how decisions are made, how things are being concealed, who knows what. The operation is still concealed. Goals and final objectives are still unknown at large. And by the way, in the School of Spooks, you're learning that for any action, you should have an action to cover it, to cover your intent. You change a couple accents and your story starts to sound different, right? That's, I think, what we're observing here. Then, how do we gauge the words of Mr. Podolyak, who, the spokesperson for the president, who said that Ukraine shared some information with the partners? It goes against the official data that we did not tell anybody. Well, perhaps Michael is conducting his own cover operation, right? He perhaps, we don't know what he was told, so he may be telling what he was told. The first of elements of cover operation is to cover it in front of your own citizens, then to do a cover operation in front of partners, and then the enemy. There are different ones. But the main thing is to protect yourself from your own, because they know more. They deduce faster. Oh, I don't know what conclusion should I make out of all that potpourri. You know, Nikolai, what conclusion we can make? In the Western media, even the most pedantic one, where they check things, check all the facts, they're always still working about organizing the opinion in certain direction. And they're not certifying that this is true. They're saying that high-level official is telling us that this, and this happened. Well, they honestly reprinted that official, right? They're not confirming that this actually was 101% correct. They're just reporting that this person reported it to us. And as being honest, we're conveying that to you. So everything is as we heard it. All right, now about more detectives. We just dissected one. There is another one, the NORDSTREAM. It still bothers people. And you're saying that this is a very resonant story, that the damage is significant that was done to Germany and their property and their markets. I read this article by Wall Street Journal, an interesting publication about how 5 or 6 effective managers, right, intel officers with scuba diving certificates managed to cause such a huge damage. It's interesting. I heard how you commented this situation, but I'm curious, in your view, how would Zaluzhny, Commander-in-Chief, how should he behave in this regard? Because he was perhaps making that decision or authorizing it. And what would be the strategy for Supreme Commander-in-Chief if indeed he sanctioned this operation and then he couldn't cancel it or decided not to cancel? But with all that, if Chervinsky indeed was a participant and somehow after this operation he was facing Ukrainian court for a while, he was detained, how one can treat that, how one can unwrap it in relation to decisions and the right method of behavior by the leaders? Nikolai, there are only 2 options here. Commander-in-Chief and Supreme Commander-in-Chief have either confirmed this operation, and then this is a business of Ukraine as a country, or perhaps this is an initiative of private persons who are also military officers. And if it is a private initiative, we should say the following thing to Germans. This was initiative of private persons. Could have been. You know, in our country, everything is possible, and in life, things are possible. Right, I believe you, but I'm questioning what's the right behavior in this regard. Okay, I'm drawing the model. What's the best way? One should come to Germans and say, dear friends, we have deduced that this is the initiative of private persons. Here is the list. They are detained by our police, and we're investigating the details of the case. Given that they're active military servicemen and they're heroes with certain achievements and awards, we're not putting them in prison. They are under house arrest. Interparliamentary Commission, can start figuring out the truth, right? Ukraine has nothing to do with it. Private persons have carried it out. The officials have missed it. And then this is not the Ukraine as the country to blame. There is no reason to diminish support of Ukraine or to spoil the relations between Germany and Ukraine. Even if the effect was drastic on German economy, Ukraine is not to blame as a country. And then, while nobody's listening to us, while we're talking to Germans, if we indeed think that these private persons are heroes, then the government should, on official level, be blaming them as much as they can. But informal Telegram channels should be explaining how heroic they were, that they served the country and they served our victory in this war. They can be in some detainment, good food rations, computer games, books, whatever they need, or sit at home in house arrest. And when at the end of the war there'll be negotiations, they can be released via amnesty. And of course, Germany will probably not like them, but people of Ukraine most likely will. And that would be a reasonable strategy in this case, I think. Do you think staying quiet is an option? No, this is not an option at all. We need to be maximally transparent. Why? Because that threatens our relations with Germany. That threatens to get them worse. If we're hiding, its perspective of breaking our good relations with one of the key countries in the European Union. Even Brits are third in the list of aid to Ukraine. Germany is second. But what I cannot understand, why, Nikolai, hang on. Our basic scenario is that it was carried out by private persons. Then commander-in-chief, none of the officials sanctioned it, so private persons are the ones to bear the responsibility. You cannot make president responsible for that. If a private person is beating somebody or hurting somebody and the person is a soldier, is commander-in-chief responsible? No, it's the soldier who has done it. Similar thing here. I know these people we're talking about. I think they actually could have carried it out in a private fashion without letting Zaluzhny or Zelensky be aware of this operation. Or if somebody told them, they could have not even believed it. And they could have said, oh yeah, if you're nuts like that, go blow everything up, right? Not serious. And that was, remember, it was a difficult time. Most difficult defense when Russia was dumping 60,000 shells on our heads and we had nothing to return fire with. There definitely was not on the radar these NORDSTREAMs and everything. So I can consider that it would be private persons in this regard. I think the basic version is that. Zelensky and Zaluzhny would probably be smart enough to calculate possible consequences. All right, that's interesting grading of their efficacy. Well, yeah, I mean, from their point of view, they see things differently. And when you daily intensively interact with your partners, you start to think how they will react to this event. It's pretty easy. It becomes rather transparent from that different viewpoint. I don't think they would sanction it. For me, until the opposite is proved, the base version is that this was the initiative of private citizens. In your view, Germany as a partner and as an ally of Ukraine in this war, do they have to publish the results of that publication? Do you think Germany should make them secret without publishing them at large, at least during the war? I don't know if it's good or bad, but since 1945 in Germany and the horrible experience of Nazi regime, they were building a maximally open society. That's why it's very difficult to falsify things or hide things there. They're making decisions. But it is a parliamentary state with coalition government, and it's much more difficult to hide anything in this environment. If it was a more centralized situation, perhaps you could put some secrecy on it and say, we'll deal with this after the war. But in a parliamentary nation, opposition is controlling a lot of things. They're represented in different levels of org, and they have some control over different organs and services, and society at large has access to data. So any attempt to hide stuff would have caused a negative reaction, and politicians are making their decisions. So perhaps they're saving the cohesiveness of their government with that. and they're trading to continue supporting Ukraine despite of the noise that this story is making. We don't know all the details that about the price that is paid by Ukraine or by German officials by conducting this research in this fashion. But we can say that Germans are very logical, very supportive of Ukraine, and they're doing a lot to help us win this war. That's why it is inconceivable to accuse them in some work against Ukraine. I vocally denounce that theory, and it was just a tragic situation when Angela Merkel created a pipeline where Germans were getting cheap gas from Russia, and they were very dependent on it, but it was cheap, and they had competitive advantage over other countries in Europe and over United States in some fashions. And United States was very competitive with Germany, but Germans had to buy natural gas because America has their own, but Germans don't. So when the Nord Stream was blown up, every German felt the pain and continues to feel it. And German economy is feeling it too. They're losing some competitiveness, or they're at the verge of it. So it is a huge macroeconomic influence, right? And the fact that somebody blows up your strategic objects that you spend so much time and effort to build, it's difficult to put a gag order on that, especially in the country that is rather transparent. I don't think this task can be solved with any federal chancellor. If anybody ordered that, he just cannot do that. This would become known by opposition press, and he'll be torn apart immediately, and the government will probably fall apart. And we cannot say if the next government will be just as loyal to our interests of winning in this war. So the right advice, or the right approach in this case, is to formally do everything right. That here is the base scenario. Yes, it was initiative of the private persons. We're still investigating. But, right, we still need to interact with Germany. You cannot shut down negotiations and communications with them. If they want to have a joint commission, we need to be open and do it together. And then, after the war, we'll see. Many people in Ukraine took this publication about the blow-up of Nord Stream as sort of retaliation for Ukraine's incursion in the Kursk district, that we did not share that information with Western allies, and now they're hitting us and publishing that in Germany. No, Nikolai. It's impossible in Germany to come to some official and say, no, just hold the results of the investigation, don't publish them. It's difficult for us to understand because it seems in our country a lot of things are being managed via the phone call, but in Germany that would be a political death of you. Well, it's difficult to say. There are some precedents. There was a loud investigation about Wirecard, and I think it was almost Scholz, as the Minister of Finance in the Merkel's government, who was responsible for letting some damage to occur to Germany. They named damage of 30 billion euros in parliamentary investigation. Well, this is about risks in financial operations. There are a lot of people interested in success of this process, but it's difficult to establish guilt. And we're talking now about actually putting explosives on the pipeline. This is a rather difficult and different scenario. So, given the current coalition that is so fragile in Germany, I would once again say that they are managing to supply us regularly with a lot of needed items. And we don't know what the next coalition will be. The fact that any attempt to hide it will destroy the coalition, I can guarantee. End of first hour.